Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show that takes complex global topics and delivers the essential knowledge you need to be completely informed. Today, we are opening up the history and geopolitics of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's a country that seems to live simultaneously in, ancient times and the radical future.
It is a complete study in paradox. I mean, when you look at Saudi Arabia, you see the world's most critical oil exporter. But you also see a religious absolutist monarchy, the symbolic center of the Islamic world. And yet right now, it's a state undergoing this staggering top-down social and economic revolution, all of it driven by its current de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS.
And that's exactly why we're here. We've synthesized material that spans, 14 centuries? We're starting with pre-Islamic tribes and going all the way to the very recent, very dramatic power plays happening right now in Riyadh. It's a huge historical arc.
And our mission today is really to understand how this highly complex, highly centralized kingdom was forged. We need to dissect the forces that shaped it. You've got the ancient source of its religious authority, you've got this persistent challenge of foreign powers, and then you have the specific and often ruthless formula the Al Saud dynasty used to seize and maintain total control.
Right. So if we can boil down 1,400 years of history into a single aha moment for you listening, what is it we're trying to show?
The aha moment is seeing how the Arabian Peninsula, which was for over 1,000 years, a weak, fragmented desert territory, really peripheral to global power, how it became the ultimate global power player. It did this by engineering the specific, perfectly timed alignment of three things. First, a religious reform movement, Wahhabism. Second, the brutal political ambition of the Al Saud dynasty. And third, the discovery and leverage of the world's most valuable commodity, oil.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning, the 7th century. Because to understand the politics, you really have to understand the geography of the peninsula first. Saudi Arabia today covers the center and north, but the ancient power dynamics were all dictated by three very different geographical zones.
Absolutely. Think of them as three corners of a triangle, and each one shaped the country's identity in a totally different way. So first, you have the West, the Hijaz. It's this region hugging the Red Sea. That's the Holy Land. It's the birthplace of Islam, home to Mecca and Medina.
Okay, so that's the religious heartland.
Exactly. Then you have the vast, arid central plateau, the Najd. This is the tribal heartland, very remote from any coasts or empires. And finally, you have the eastern coast along the Persian Gulf, which, ironically, was the least important area for centuries, until it became the most important economically because, of course, that's where the oil is.
And before Islam came along and provided this central unifying faith, the power structure in that religious heartland, the Hijaz, was purely practical, wasn't it? It was rooted in survival.
It was about water and security, simple as that. The Quraysh tribe in Mecca, they rose to prominence in the 6th century. And their power came from the fact that they were the custodians of the only real water source, the well of Zamzam. You have to remember, Mecca isn't near a river or a natural harbor. So if you control the well, you control everyone.
And the second lever of power was trade security. They managed that vital north-south trade route from Yemen up into Syria.
Yes, they secured the roads for the traders and for the pilgrims. They brokered deals with all these volatile desert tribes so they wouldn't raid the caravans. So when Islam emerged, the prophet himself was from the Quraysh tribe. And this instantly gave the new religious movement the social and economic weight it needed to just explode out of the peninsula.
And that initial expansion, that surge of Arab Islamic power, it fundamentally redrew the entire global map. It took on the two great empires of the ancient world,
Sassanid Iran and Byzantine Rome. And these two giants had been locked in these exhausting centuries-long wars. They were just weary, they were financially drained, and this created a political and military vacuum that the newly unified, newly energized Arabs just surged right into, establishing this dominant Islamic power structure that spread far beyond the peninsula.
But history shows that this centralized Arab power structure, first run from Damascus, then Baghdad, it was pretty fragile. It didn't really maintain tight control over its own birthplace for very long.
The centrifugal forces were just too strong. Once the Abbasid era really got going in Baghdad, power started to fragment almost immediately. I mean, by the 10th century, the caliphate in Baghdad was, politically speaking, a shell. The caliph often held only ceremonial authority. Sometimes he barely governed more than the city of Baghdad itself. The Islamic world just shattered into competing regional powers.
And this fragmentation wasn't just about some distant governors getting a bit of autonomy. For our deep dive, the critical development was the rise of rivals who directly challenged Baghdad's religious legitimacy. And they did it right on the peninsula's doorstep.
Exactly. You see these regional Sunni powers popping up like the Sassanids and the Seljuks, but the really existential challenge came from the Shia Ismaili Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. The Fatimids completely rejected the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. They said he was not the rightful successor to the Prophet.
So they weren't just a political alternative. They were claiming the mantle of universal spiritual authority right across the Red Sea in Cairo.
And their influence was potent. It was real. They extended their control into the holy cities and across North Africa and the Levant. You also see other Shia groups, like the Zaydis controlling places like Yemen, Oman, Bahrain. The Abbasids had definitively lost control over the very cities, Mecca and Medina, that gave them all their religious prestige.
And the symbol of this humiliation was pretty profound. The sources say the Fatimids even broke the black stone in the Kaaba at one point. I mean, they physically desecrated the holiest site in Islam.
It was an act designed to just completely undermine the Abbasid Caliph. The thinking was, if the supposed successor of the Prophet can't even protect the Sacred Heart of the faith, then his political claim is worthless. Right. This whole chaotic period shows this crucial pattern. The birthplace of Islam was politically vulnerable and, more often than not, controlled by outsiders.
And that external control then becomes formalized, and it lasts for 500 years.
Half a millennium of foreign administration. The fragmentation just invited strongmen to intervene. So in the 12th century, you have the rise of Saladin. The sources are very specific. He was an Iraqi Kurd born in Tikrit, a commander who united forces against the Crusaders and his other rivals.
And when Saladin's Ayyubid kingdom took control of the Hijaz region, he established a precedent that defines Saudi leadership right up to this day.
He was the very first person to take the title, custodian of the two holy mosques. Just think about the gravity of that for a second. The title signifies that the holiest sites are guarded by a strong external power. In Saladin's case, his government was in Cairo, in Egypt. It was a clear statement that the religious authority, even though it's located in Arabia, it required a non-Arab military power to keep it safe.
So the key geopolitical point here is that for 5 straight centuries, the power governing the peninsula was actually located outside the peninsula.
Absolutely. After Saladin, control passed to the Mamluks. They were originally slave soldiers who seized control of Egypt and inherited the custodianship. Then, in 1517, the Ottoman Turks, under Sultan Selim I, conquered the Mamluk realm.
And with that conquest, the Ottomans become the new custodians. And this all happens during this tremendous global shift, the Age of Discovery.
And this context is vital. While the Ottomans were building this huge land empire, European maritime powers, especially Portugal, were sailing around Africa. They started bypassing all the old land and Red Sea trade routes. So the economic importance of that Hijaz trade axis just began to decline, which made the remote Arabian interior even less of a priority for the Ottomans.
So even though the Ottomans officially ruled from the 16th to the 20th century, their physical control was, largely ceremonial outside of the holy cities and a few ports.
Precisely. Their authority was rigid, right near the key sites, but it got weaker and weaker the further you went into the peninsula. I mean, they had bigger fish to fry. The Safavid Empire in Iran, European encroachment in the Balkans, they treated the Arabian interior, especially the Najd Desert, as a low priority. And this lack of rigid Ottoman control in the remote interior created the strategic and political void that the founders of the modern Saudi state would eventually exploit.
Okay, so while the Ottomans are busy focusing on Europe and Iran, far away from Istanbul, deep in that quiet, central, hot heartland of the Najd, a new force starts to stir in the 18th century.
This is the critical juncture. This is the moment. Here, political dissent against the distant, often ineffective Ottoman administration merges perfectly with a powerful new religious and intellectual movement. This is the seed of the modern kingdom.
And the intellectual figure at the heart of this was Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. What was the core of his message?
His movement, which is often known globally as Wahhabism, or sometimes Salafism, it emerged in the mid-18th century. It was rooted in the Hanbali school of Sunni Islam, which is traditionally the most strict and literalist of the 4 schools. But Wahhabism went even further. It saw a lot of common practices across the Ottoman world, like visiting saints' tombs or celebrating the Prophet's birthday, as polytheistic innovations that had corrupted the purity of Islam.
So it wasn't just a legal difference, it was a fundamental puritanical attack on the religious status quo that was being upheld by the Ottoman Sultan.
It was a direct intellectual challenge to Ottoman legitimacy. The Ottomans, who favored a different school of law and tolerated a degree of mysticism, they represented exactly the kind of deviation Abdul Wahhab wanted to eradicate. His zeal was so intense that he was actually exiled from his own village. His preaching was just too disruptive.
And that exile leads him straight to the political ambition that gave his movement real teeth, the Ibn Saud clan.
In 1744, Abdul Wahhab finds refuge with Muhammad bin Saud and his son Abdul Aziz near what would eventually become Riyadh. And this meeting created what the sources call a collective power, much greater than the sum of their individual powers. The deal was simple. The Al Saud clan would provide the military might and political structure. Abdul Wahhab would provide the ideological justification and the religious fervor needed to conquer territory.
And this was the official start of the first Saudi state in the Najd. Their goal was explicit, right? Expel the Ottomans, take the whole peninsula.
And they succeeded at first. They took a lot of territory. But the Ottomans were not about to let the custodianship of Mecca and Medina fall into the hands of some puritanical desert tribe. So they mobilized massive, modernized Egyptian forces to go in and crush the first Saudi state. And the Egyptians did. They took control of the western Hijaz for about 20 years.
But the Saudis came back. They established the second Saudi state in 1824 with Riyadh as the capital. What allowed them to resurge like that?
It was once again geopolitical distraction. The Napoleonic Wars and all the power struggles in Europe that followed, they destabilized both the Ottomans and their Egyptian proxies. The Ottomans were just focused elsewhere. And since Arabia, pre-oil, was seen as this strategic backwater, hot, dry, costly to control, the Al Saud were able to rise again in their Najd heartland.
Which really highlights how the survival of the early Saudi state was always kind of inversely proportional to the strength of its neighbors.
Exactly. The moment their neighbors weakened, they had a window. But the second state was also inherently unstable. It collapsed not just because the Ottomans came back, but critically because of internal rivalries.
What kind of internal rivalries?
Primarily with the al-Rashid family, who were also powerful tribal leaders in the Najd. The al-Rashid actually got Ottoman support for a while as a counterweight to the Al Saud, and ultimately, the combined pressure of that internal feuding and a resurgent Ottoman grip forced the Al Saud family, including the young Abdul Aziz bin Saud, into exile in Kuwait in 1891.
And their exile in Kuwait puts them right in the middle of the sphere of a rising global superpower, Great Britain.
The late 19th century was Britain's zenith. Their entire global strategy hinged on securing the route to India, their main artery. And once the Suez Canal opened in 1869, that whole Red Sea corridor became absolutely paramount.
And how did little Kuwait fit into this massive British global calculation?
Kuwait was strategically essential for containing the Ottoman Empire's expansion down towards the Persian Gulf. By controlling or influencing Kuwait, the British created this crucial geographical problem for the Ottomans, basically blocking their access to the Gulf. Which, by the way, is the same geographical problem that later drove Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait.
So Abdulaziz ibn Saud, the man who had found the modern state, he grows up not in the remote desert, but in this sophisticated, British-influenced strategic port.
And that experience was formative. He learned diplomacy, he learned about strategic alliances, he began his consolidation of power in 1904, retaking Riyadh and founding the Third Saudi state. And to do this, he needed a loyal military force rooted in that Wahhabi ideology.
And that military force was the Ikhwan, the Brotherhood.
The Ikhwan were the military realization of the Wahhabi doctrine. They were settled tribes housed in these communities called Hijra, and they were just intensely indoctrinated. They were the shock troops of Abdulaziz, fighting with this extreme religious zeal to spread Wahhabi beliefs across the entire peninsula.
The sources mention their fundamentalism even extended to rejecting modern technology.
Oh, yes. They were profoundly reactionary. They violently opposed what they saw as European inventions, the telegraph, the telephone, even cars. They saw them as un-Islamic innovations that corrupted the purity of the faith. They were incredibly effective warriors precisely because they saw the world in absolute black and white. They fought with a fervor their rivals just couldn't match.
So when World War I rolls around, Britain has this perfect opportunity to play two key local rivals against their common enemy, the Ottomans.
They leveraged two powerful figures, Sharif Hussein, the Hashemite emir of Mecca, who was the existing traditional Ottoman ally, and Abdul Aziz Al Saud, the ambitious emir of Najd. Britain just wanted to secure the peninsula and disrupt Ottoman logistics. They didn't really care who did it.
And the detail here, which always reads like something out of a spy novel, is the dual British deployment.
It's fascinating. You have the famous T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, sent to support Sharif Hussein in the Hijaz. But at the same time, another agent, a man named William Shakespeare, was sent to Ibn Saud in the Najd. Britain literally paid pensions to both of them, ensuring they both fought the Ottomans while balancing their power so neither one became too dominant.
But the moment the Ottomans were gone, that balance just shattered. Ibn Saud immediately turned on his rival, Sharif Hussein.
The goal was always the holy cities and that custodianship title. Ibn Saud defeated Sharif Hussein's forces, and he brought the vast majority of the peninsula under his control. He officially proclaimed the formation of the unified kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1926, and he claimed the title of custodian of the two holy mosques. This was the first time in 500 years that a local, non-external power held that title.
Sharif Hussein was exiled, but his sons still ended up as kings in the remnants of the Ottoman Empire.
Yes, as a reward for their help. Britain, when it was drawing the borders for the new mandates, Iraq, Syria, and Transjordan, it placed Hussein's sons as the monarchs. And the Hashemite family, descendants of Sharif Hussein, they still rule Jordan today. It's an enduring legacy of that World War I settlement.
So Ibn Saud's biggest task now was governance. He had unified this disparate tribal kingdom using zealots like the Ikhwan. He now had to stabilize a state where centralized systems barely even existed.
It was a chaotic mess. The first challenge was institutionalizing justice. He had to take the administration of law out of the hands of individual tribes, which was a huge disruption. He had to build basic infrastructure, and critically, he had to manage the Ikhwan. Because once they had conquered the territory, their puritanical zeal turned against the king himself, challenging his perceived modernizations.
He had to suppress the very army he built.
Precisely. Abdulaziz eventually had to put down the Ikhwan in a series of bloody battles because their fundamentalism threatened his political stability and his need to engage with the modern world. He cemented his foothold globally, signing treaties with everyone from the Soviet Union, who were the first to recognize the kingdom, to Germany and Italy. He showed a pragmatism the Ikhwan could never accept.
Okay, so the political and religious foundations are now set. You have the Saud dynasty, the Wahhabi ideology, the custodian title. But the one piece that transforms them from a poor desert state into a global heavyweight is still missing, and that's oil.
And oil arrives relatively late. Iran discovered oil in 1908. Saudi Arabia didn't find commercial quantities until 30 years later. And initially, the British, the dominant regional power, they were skeptical. They offered very low bids for concessions because they believed the major reserves were all elsewhere.
That British skepticism, that failure of imagination, was the critical strategic blunder that opened the door for the Americans.
It defined the entire future of the Middle East. The concession was eventually given to the Standard California Company, part of Standard Oil, in 1933. Production started in the early 1940s, right as World War II was in full swing.
And that timing is just so crucial for setting the U.S.-Saudi relationship.
It could not have been better time for the Saudis. I mean, Iran's oil industry matured under British dominance, so it was fundamentally tied to the British Empire. Saudi Arabia's oil production came online after World War II, exactly when the U.S. was asserting itself as the new global superpower and displacing Britain.
This shift was officially consecrated in one of the most consequential meetings of the 20th century, that 1945 rendezvous.
King Abdulaziz and U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt met aboard the USS Quincy, an American destroyer, anchored in the Great Bitter Lake in the middle of the Suez Canal.
The optics of that are just profound. A meeting between the new global hegemon and the desert king, held in the middle of the canal that was the literal heart of the fading British Empire.
It was a clear signal that the strategic relationship had shifted. This meeting formalized the U.S.-Saudi alliance. It established the core bargain that really defines our world today. The U.S. guarantees the stability and security of the Al Saud regime. And in return, Saudi Arabia provides assured, uninterrupted access to oil priced in dollars, the petrodollar system.
And this pact solidified that incredibly complex dual identity of the kingdom.
It created a paradox. Externally, the kingdom became America's staunchest ally in the Middle East, politically, economically, militarily reliant on the West. Internally, however, the regime had to maintain its legitimacy through that conservative, puritanical Wahhabi ideology that fueled its creation. It became a U.S. ally rooted in religious absolutism.
And this dual identity immediately placed Saudi Arabia in a very complex relationship with its major regional rival, Iran.
They both became founding members of OPEC. Oil, alongside the Hajj pilgrimage, was their common ground and their competitive battleground. They competed fiercely over production quotas and price setting, but their underlying political systems were fundamentally opposed. A Sunni religious monarchy allied with the U.S., versus a Shia theocracy that became increasingly hostile to the West after 1979. The wealth flowing from that oil must have completely transformed the governance challenge for the House of Saud.
Oh, absolutely. Before oil, Abdulaziz had to use religious fervor, Wahhabism, to unify all these disparate tribes. Post-oil, the immense state revenue gave them the financial leverage to quiet dissent. The monarchy could use the oil wealth to build this extensive welfare state, fund its foreign policy, and, crucially, establish massive patronage networks that guaranteed the loyalty of the vast royal family and the religious establishment. Oil essentially bought the Al Saud dynasty decades of stability.
Let's move to the 21st century and the dramatic disruption of this stable, oil-backed sort of corporate structure of the royal family. The sources emphasize just how huge the House of Saud is. It's massive. King Abdulaziz had 45 sons who reached adulthood. And traditionally, the succession moved laterally from brother to brother. This led to this large, aging board of directors, all of whom felt they had a right to power or influence or a lucrative ministry post. The system was stable, but it was slow and very resistant to any kind of radical change.
And Mohammed bin Salman, the man who blew up that system, he wasn't initially seen as a serious contender at all.
Not even close. He's the sixth son of the current King Salman. And unlike many of his half-brothers who are, Oxford or Harvard educated, politically savvy, experienced in military affairs, MBS stayed local. He studied law at King Saud University in Riyadh. He had limited foreign experience, was largely unknown. He was just lost in a crowd of thousands of princes.
So how did this unknown prince leapfrog dozens of older, more experienced relatives?
He cultivated one relationship above all others: his father, Salman. MBS attached himself to his father, starting around 2009. He served as his special advisor when Salman was the long-serving governor of Riyadh. He just made himself indispensable. So when Salman finally became king in January 2015, MBS's ascent was meteoric. And it was absolutely shocking to the establishment.
He went straight to becoming the youngest defense minister in the world. But King Salman had to navigate tradition very carefully to really pave the way for his son.
It was a political masterclass in manipulation. First, King Salman removed his younger half-brother Mukran as crown prince after only 3 months. And this allowed Salman to change the succession law, effectively opening the door for the grandsons of Abdulaziz to rule, instead of just sticking to the remaining sons.
And then came the transitional figure, Mohammed bin Nayef, or MBN.
MBN was the popular, highly credible choice. U.S. educated, known for successfully running counterterrorism, he was the known quantity, especially in Washington. So he was installed as crown prince. And at the same time, MBS was made deputy crown prince. This instantly had him leapfrogging older, far more experienced brothers who really felt they were next in line.
So MBN was the bridge, but Salman's true intent was always his son, MBS.
Correct. The sources suggest MBN was just a temporary measure to stabilize things. The real shift came in June 2017. MBS was only 32 years old. King Salman deposed MBN from every key post: crown prince, prime minister, and interior minister. And MBS took his place. This wasn't just a personnel change. It shattered the long-standing tradition of consensus and generational transition within the House of Saud.
So the family corporation was suddenly being run by a very young, relatively inexperienced CEO who had just bypassed his entire board. MBS had to know he couldn't afford any dissent.
He needed to neutralize any potential rivals before his father passed away, to ensure no organized opposition could block his ascension. And the solution was the infamous Ritz-Carlton operation just 5 months later.
This was the anti-corruption purge that rocked the kingdom and the entire global financial world.
It was a strategic masterstroke disguised as reform. In November 2017, nearly 400 of the kingdom's elite ministers, princes, top military officials, businessmen, they were summoned to the luxurious Ritz-Carlton Hotel for what they thought was a meeting, only to find themselves imprisoned.
And the list of detainees reads like a who's who of the Saudi power structure.
He targeted the institutional pillars and the financial pillars. Prince Mutayyib bin Abdullah, the powerful head of the National Guard, was detained. That stripped MBS's rivals of a key independent security force. And billionaire Prince Walid bin Talal was held. That stripped them of financial independence.
And the outcome wasn't some judicial process, but forced financial surrender.
Exactly. Detainees were coerced into signing contracts that surrendered control of huge assets or billions of dollars directly to the government. The authorities claim they recovered over $107 billion. It was a clear message to the entire royal family. Your wealth and your loyalty now belong to MBS. You are not above the law.
The sources also point to this chilling atmosphere created by an event that happened on the very same day.
The suspicious death of Prince Mansur bin Mukran, nephew of the king and son of the previously deposed crown prince, in a helicopter crash. Whether it was a coincidence or not, these events collectively cemented MBS's image. He was ruthless, untouchable, and willing to use any means necessary to consolidate his power.
And this image was immediately exported globally, too. I'm thinking of the forced resignation of the Lebanese prime minister.
The Saud Hariri incident. Hariri was summoned to Riyadh and, very strangely, resigned on television. MBS was reportedly furious that Hariri wasn't doing enough to counter Hezbollah's influence in Lebanon. This aggressive move just showed MBS's willingness to project force and destabilize regional politics to get what he wanted, reinforcing his reputation as a desert warrior in a designer suit.
Yet, almost immediately, MBS pivots to this image of a great reformer launching Vision 2030.
He had to balance the ruthless purger image with that of a necessary modernizer. And Vision 2030 is his grand project. It's a massive undertaking to diversify the economy away from oil, to create a sustainable future, and to appeal to the 70% of the Saudi population who are under 30.
And this is where we see the most futuristic and maybe most challenging part of his vision, the city of Neom.
Neom is a radical attempt to build a futuristic megacity in the Red Sea coast, projected to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. The vision is startling. A city designed to have more robots than people, entirely sustainable, aiming to be the world's most attractive place to live and work. It's an economic statement trying to reposition Saudi Arabia as a leader in tech and future infrastructure, not just oil.
He also recognized that to attract global investment, he had to change that entrenched religious narrative that founded the state back in 1744.
He had to destroy the power of the clerical establishment that preached that puritanical Wahhabism. He promised the world a return to moderate Islam and the immediate destruction of radical thought. And to achieve this, he arrested prominent, influential clerics like Salman al-Uda, who might oppose his social engineering.
This is a huge shift. The state is moving from needing the clerics for legitimacy to seeing them as an impediment to economic viability.
It's the ultimate narrative thread connecting the Ikhwan to MBS. The founder, Abdulaziz, used Wahhabism to seize power, but then suppressed its most extreme elements for political stability. MBS is doing the same. But his reason is economic stability. He's removing the power of the religious police entirely, allowing the social liberalization that's necessary to attract and retain international talent.
And the social changes have been truly transformative, especially for women.
Unprecedented. And the reforms are highly strategic. Abolishing the powers of the religious police was step one. Then you have allowing cinemas, allowing music in cafes, hosting massive public entertainment events where men and women can mix freely.
And for women, the list of changes goes way beyond just the right to drive.
Yes, the right to drive was the symbolic watershed moment. But it extended to the right to work, to run businesses, to attend sporting events, even to join the military. And crucially, many of these rights were granted without the previous rigid requirement for a male guardian's permission. This is a systematic dismantling of decades of conservative social control, all designed to empower half the population to participate in the Vision 2030 economy.
But the sources also suggest that these dramatic social reforms are masking some massive economic challenges in Vision 2030. It's not a guaranteed success, is it?
Not at all. The challenge is immense, creating millions of private sector jobs for Saudis, reducing the massive public sector payroll, and funding projects like NEOM, which critics say could cost $1 trillion, all while relying on foreign investment. It's fraught with risk. The social contract is changing. Saudis traditionally expected the state to provide comfortable government jobs in exchange for political silence. MBS is asking them to embrace risk and private entrepreneurship. That's a huge cultural shift that could face quiet resistance if the economic benefits don't show up quickly.
Just as MBS was presenting himself as this dynamic, visionary reformer ready to bring Saudi Arabia into the modern global economy, his image was instantly shattered by the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, who was this journalist.
Khashoggi was not a radical figure. He was an establishment insider. He was the most important Saudi journalist, a former advisor to the ex-intelligence chief Turki al-Faisal. He had deep roots in the system. But his critical pen got him in trouble, and he was banned from tweeting during MBS's early rise to power.
He went into self-imposed exile in the U.S. in September 2017, and he started writing columns for the Washington Post that were highly critical of MBS's rapid, undemocratic consolidation of power.
He went from being a quiet critic to an international symbol of dissent. Khashoggi voiced the concerns of many moderate, educated Saudis who supported some reform but were appalled by the arbitrary arrests and the Ritz-Carlton purges.
Yeah.
His criticisms were uniquely dangerous to MBS because they came from an insider.
And MBS's inner circle made a direct and highly intimidating attempt to lure him back into the kingdom.
Yes. Saud al-Qahtani, a senior advisor to MBS who was central to the purges, he contacted Khashoggi. He offered him a job as a royal advisor and a safe return. Khashoggi correctly suspected this was a trap. He knew al-Qahtani was the de facto enforcer of MBS's will. He refused to go back.
But he needed critical paperwork for his upcoming marriage to his Turkish fiancée, Hatice Cengiz.
And that necessity drove him to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2, 2018. He entered, and he never left. The Turkish authorities, who had apparently been monitoring the situation, immediately uncovered a chilling scenario.
A 15-man Saudi intelligence and security team, including key figures like a royal guard who frequently traveled with MBS and a forensic pathology expert. They all flew into Istanbul just hours before Khashoggi's appointment.
The presence of a forensic expert makes the premeditation of the crime undeniable. After the murder, the consulate attempted this clumsy but elaborate cover-up. They used a body double who wore Khashoggi's clothes and glasses to exit the building, trying to create evidence that he had left alive.
What ultimately doomed that cover-up?
Turkish intelligence, the MIT, was watching. They noted one crucial detail. The body double left wearing Khashoggi's clothes, but he forgot to change his shoes. They also had intercepted audio and communications, including a report that the command for the killing was relayed via video call from Saud al-Qahtani back in Riyadh.
After 18 days of just outright denial, Saudi Arabia finally conceded that the journalist died inside the consulate.
But they clung to this absurd claim that he died in a brawl. And this narrative was immediately rejected by the global community, mainly because of the aggressive stance of Turkish President Erdogan.
Erdogan made sure the world saw the gravity of the crime.
He took the lead in the international outrage, leaking horrific details and specifically accusing senior Saudi government officials, not rogues, he said, but officials, of ordering a premeditated murder. This diplomatic fallout led immediately to an unofficial Saudi boycott of Turkish goods and a severe downturn in relations.
And crucially, U.S. intelligence weighed in, placing the responsibility squarely on MBS's shoulders.
The CIA report strongly suggested MBS had ordered the assassination. While MBS continues to deny any direct role, the evidence was damning. It included reports of at least 11 messages exchanged between MBS and al-Qahtani in the hours directly surrounding the murder.
The internal Saudi trial, which prosecuted 11 unnamed individuals, was viewed internationally as a complete sham.
It was, as the sources describe it, a parade for justice. 5 initial death sentences were commuted to prison terms. The truly high-ranking figures who gave the commands, like Saud al-Qahtani, were simply dismissed from their posts. They were never arrested, never held accountable in court, and MBS's name was never even mentioned. The message was clear. There is no accountability at the highest level of the regime.
And this action turned MBS into a global pariah. Then presidential candidate Joe Biden vowed that the Saudi government would pay the price.
For 2 years, MBS kept this unnaturally low profile on the international stage, just waiting for the global political environment to shift in his favor. And that shift came with the invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
The war and the sanctions on Russia that followed created the perfect opportunity for MBS to reclaim his stature.
It gave him the ultimate leverage, the oil weapon. When Russian sanctions sent oil prices soaring, the U.S. and Europe desperately needed Saudi Arabia, the only country with significant spare capacity to increase production and stabilize global energy markets.
And MBS played this hand brilliantly, pushing back against the country that once vowed to make him a pariah.
He ignored President Biden's initial phone calls. He publicly snubbed the U.S. by signing a major refining deal with China, signaling that he had other geopolitical options. Frankly, humiliating policy reversal from the Biden administration.
The result was that 2022 meeting, forcing Biden to travel to Jeddah and meet the Crown Prince, effectively restoring MBS's international legitimacy despite the Khashoggi murder.
And that meeting just demonstrated a harsh reality. In global foreign policy, calculations of power, especially energy power and national interest, fundamentally trump human rights concerns. MBS successfully leveraged Saudi Arabia's foundational asset oil to navigate the biggest human rights crisis of his career.
This deep dive shows an incredible trajectory. You have the Arabian Peninsula, starting as the spiritual center of Islam but controlled by external powers for centuries, the Ayyubids, Mamluks, Ottomans, British, finally achieving true sovereignty and global influence.
And that global power was meticulously engineered. It was a strategic fusion of the Saud dynasty, providing the ruthless political structure, Wahhabi ideology providing the religious legitimacy and unity, and then the vast oil reserves providing the economic foundation, all of it ultimately secured by the U.S. security umbrella.
And now you have MBS running the kingdom, operating as a kind of modern desert warrior who uses the traditional tactics of ruthless consolidation, the purges, alongside these radical economic and social reforms to secure his reign.
And while his human rights record is deeply troubling, the sources strongly suggest that his emergence represents the best, perhaps the only, chance for the kind of dramatic, systemic modernization that Saudi Arabia requires to survive in a post-oil world. He is actively remodeling the foundations of the state years before he even officially inherits the throne.
So we've established that the three interwoven pillars that define the modern kingdom are MBS as the custodian of the holy mosques, the Al-Saud Wahhabi political alliance, and the U.S. security umbrella in exchange for oil.
That is the modern Saudi equation.
If MBS successfully implements Vision 2030 and diversifies the economy away from oil, eliminating that dependence on the commodity, he will be destroying one of the foundational pillars of the U.S.-Saudi Pact. So which of the other two historical pillars, the political alliance with Wahhabism or the custodianship of the holy cities, do you think will be the next one he attempts to fundamentally reshape or sideline to secure his legacy? That's our provocative thought for you to explore. Until next time.
Until then, stay curious.